Hi everybody! So this is another or a continuation of the discussion we had in the previous lecture about Max Weber and his proposition about how religion, and particularly a form of Protestant religious practice called Calvinism, how that resulted in capitalism. And so he looked at the connection between religion as a social institution, how that affects daily life practice on the micro scale, and how that will, or did in his argument, it did result in capitalism as an economic system where capitalism did not already exist. So that's what this lecture is a continuation of. So we're going to look right now at the particular kind of Protestant Christianity, some of the particular micro-scale behaviors of the Protestant Christians known as the Puritans. Perhaps you remember Puritanism as something you studied early on in grade school, even when you were first learning about the Pilgrims and learning about Thanksgiving and those kinds of stories. They, I guess you can use the word escaped religious persecution in England because their beliefs and their practices in daily life were so very different than the norms and behaviors in daily life that resulted from the belief that the old beliefs in the old world that poverty was God's favorite position, or he gave more favor to those who suffered through poverty on earth. He rewarded them in another life. He did not reward them here. That was how poverty was regarded in a religious mindset and in a social mindset too in the old world. Well, John Calvin is the name of a fellow who protested that idea. So he started a Protestant faith. We call it, name it after himself, John Calvin. Calvinism is the name of it. Puritanism is another name of it. John Calvin was pretty darn confident in himself, so confident that he is responsible for more burning at the stakes in Geneva, Switzerland, for instance, if you did not follow his beliefs than anybody ever saw sentenced in the Spanish Inquisition, or what we know of as the Spanish Inquisition, that gets such a bad name. It gets such a bad historic perspective from the Protestant British point of view that so affects our history textbooks. In the Spanish Inquisition, I think 30 people, unfortunately, got a death sentence, and John Calvin burned hundreds at the stake if you did not want to believe in his ideas. So anyway, many people did believe in his ideas, and the Puritans came from England where they were persecuted for their beliefs because they were so different. So that's one of the reasons they wanted to escape. Okay, one of the things that was really new and different for the way John Calvin believed, and he used biblical references for this also. Remember, I did not cite my biblical references exactly when I was talking about all the places in the Bible where you can find evidence of homelessness of Christ in his adulthood, poverty and refugee status of Christ in his younger days, or even the book of Job in the Old Testament that talks about trials and tribulations and losing everything and how God loved you for that. So there's many biblical references that you can use to prove your point that God loves people who are in the impoverished condition. But there are just as many biblical references that John Calvin used to prove his very different points of view. For instance, there are multiple places all through the Bible where a group of people called the elect are referred to versus a group of people called the damned. And these are the elect are the people in the Bible who are referred to as those who are going to enter the kingdom of heaven upon death. And the damned are the people in the Bible who are, they're going to go to HE double hockey sticks when they die. So anyway, the Doctrine of Predestination is the name of this idea that there are two groups, and two groups only, religious social stratification, if you will. There are two groups and two groups only that God creates. One group is called the elect, and the other group is called the damned. And there is no way, according to the Doctrine of Predestination, There is no way for you or for me or for your neighbor, none of us can know for sure, are we part of the elect or are we part of the damned? So they have this idea that predestination, this word means that it's already pre-decided what your destination is going to be after death. So before your birth, the idea is that God already knew, are you in the elect or are you in the damned? But there was no clear way, like a birthmark or a tattoo, there was no clear way that you could know from birth or your parents could know from birth. But this was a very new idea. The old way of thinking was you could suffer your way, you could do penance to get into heaven, you could do cleansing of your responsibility for sin, you could take part in sacrifice to cleanse yourself from sin, and you had many chances throughout life to either be in the elect or be in the damned. That was the old way. This new way that John Calvin proposed was, no, none of that. God already knows. It's already like a prepaid phone plan or something. I don't know. You already have this destination that God picked out for you, regardless of what your actions are here on earth. You're already here or you're already here. Okay. But according to this belief system, since you didn't know what group you were in, they wanted to know. I mean, we're curious creatures, human beings. And so, wouldn't you want to know, like, if this was your idea, if this was your religious belief system, that so many people were going to go to heaven and so many people were going to go to the other place, and there was nothing you could do about it, wouldn't you want to know? And so they did. Puritans, followers of John Calvinism, people who believed in the doctrine of predestination, they wanted to know, where am I going? Like, why am I here and what am I waiting for? Why don't I just take my own life now? You know what I mean? Like, what's the purpose? Remember, religion as a social institution in general gives purpose and meaning for life. So this doctrine of predestination translated into, it's not just a belief that everybody in this religion bought into or accepted. I hope that doesn't sound derogatory when I say bought into. I mean, any religious belief, people have to accept it as true in order to follow it. So this is not just something that they accepted as true, but they questioned, how do we know, are we here or are we there? And so a micro scale thing happened in their daily life, in their behavior. And remember, norms, white people norms, did not exist yet in the new world. And these folks were in the new world. And what they did to try to prove to not only themselves, but prove to other people who they were with, am I in the elect or am I in the damned? They started practicing a type of behavior, and yes, I had to ask Siri how to spell this word correctly. They started practicing a type of behavior called asceticism, which is typically, it's defined, you can ask Siri to define it for you. It's defined something like really strict behavior that you typically do for religious reasons. Okay, so this type of behavior is really strict because you want to make sure that you maintain religious purity, so to speak. You are in line with religious teaching with all of your behaviors. So asceticism emerged as a guide for daily behaviors. Remember, religion in general as a social institution, one of the purposes it serves in societies is it serves for a guide for daily behaviors or a foundation for the norms that you and I live out on a daily basis. So asceticism, through this doctrine of predestination, from the overarching ideas of John Calvin, became a daily life behavior. So that connection between macro and micro. And Max Weber observed that asceticism took its own kind of evolutionary process with the Pilgrims and with the people in the original colonies. Asceticism began as a way to prove, am I among the elect, to myself and to others. So hard work, elbow grease, like my grandma would say, studiousness, I'm sure YouTube can spell that for the captions. Studiousness, being responsible with your studies. Being responsible with money, frugal. And I asked my class one time, what does frugal mean? Somebody said, it means you're cheap. No, it doesn't mean that at all. It means you're careful with money and you're not extravagant. You don't buy things unnecessarily just for the heck of it, and you're not wasteful. So frugal is part of the economic behavior, the daily economic behavior that came out of asceticism. People who were practicing this religion still had to eat, still had to work, still had to study, still had to go into a profession. They still had to do all of these things that you and I have to do every single day. It's part of our norms still today. And not everybody does them as effectively as the next person. Am I right? We don't all, live up to the same standard. We can go back to chapter 4, the statuses that have the roles associated with them. Do all of us perform those roles exactly according to social standards? Sometimes we excel, sometimes we fall behind. If you want me as an example, I usually fall behind a little bit, but anyway, that's for psychology class. Asceticism, frugal behavior, responsible behavior, honest behavior, kind to others, responsible parents, responsible children, respectful children, cleanliness is next to godliness, you've heard that before, and frugal behavior. So, if you were successful in those endeavors and you became prosperous, meaning you had a lot of resources, you uplifted your position from not having much to having a nice house. It doesn't have to be extravagant. It doesn't have to have laser light shows all over the place. It just has to be clean. You're responsible. You take care of it. You use some of the money to take care of these kinds of things. Maybe you can expand a little bit as your family expands. You have proper clothing and shoes for your children and, things inside your house for comfort in daily life. If you are able to do that, and if you are able to amass savings because you are frugal also, then you will have the outward sign of proof to you and to everybody around you. Look at that person. That person is clearly prospering. Why would God allow it or waste? Why would God waste any of his blessings on people here on earth who were not among the elect? If asceticism worked for you, you were good at it, and you got prosperous because of that behavior, that became evidence for people who practice this religion. That became the evidence that you were among the elect. If you had all of those attributes I just went over, then you could comfortably say, I'm among the elect. When you were frugal, when you were prosperous because you were frugal, and you had more than what you really needed for comfort, but still had a nice nest egg because you kept building that, then wealth resulted. Wealth kind of was a byproduct of your frugality and your asceticism that was linked to this idea that people are either elect or they're damned. And so if you were able to amass ownership of stuff over time and reinvest responsibly some of the profit into a larger or more sufficient or comfortable space for you to live, or increased education, or increased business because you made the money from the business to begin with. Does anybody hear a pattern, that I'm talking about here, that Max Weber pointed out was the foundations of modern day capitalism like we know it? You own stuff, you profit from that ownership, you use some of that profit to improve and purchase and buy and own more stuff. That if you use responsibly according to asceticism, you are going to go through that cycle all over again, and constantly there's growth, constantly there's uplift. And so this is the observation in a nutshell that Max Weber made about the Pilgrims and the specific religious belief system that they held as true. and how they proved to themselves that they were among the elect. Not everybody in the group was successful at an ascetic lifestyle. Not everybody could hold on to money. Not everybody could resist temptations to gamble or to hoe or to drink or to whatever the evils were that damned people did. And this is the way that they looked at it, the Calvinists. If you could not resist the temptations that were in place to behave in ways not approved of through ascetic behaviors, then that meant that God was not blessing you in this life. And the only people who God doesn't bless in this life are the people who are going to go to hell anyway, the damned. That's their belief, okay? I'm not talking like Mrs. T right now, and my belief, that's their belief. And so some of you maybe are from church or faith systems that preach prosperity philosophy, which is God wants us to be wealthy and healthy and prosperous and open, and God wants us to show our prosperity. Maybe you have heard of the phrase keeping up with the Joneses. It comes from this behavior also, because if you are trying to use your prosperity as evidence that you're among the elect, you show that to others through the house you have, the clothes you have, the items that you have, the behavior of your children, but not all of them behave in the same way, right? So if you have a child or two who's a bad seed, like you're looking at one right now, different story. If you have a child or two who's a bad seed, well, it doesn't mean that you don't inherit this elect status in your DNA. This is something that you have no control over, and therefore some of your babies could be this. So if you have somebody who goes astray, if you have somebody who can't make good grades, if you have somebody who's a brat, who steals, who does blah, 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 despite all of the efforts that you put forth to teach them this and to make them buy into this behavior as evidence of this, but they fail. If you have a spouse who can't pass up the saloon with his paycheck and has to go in there and spend it all when you need milk and bologna and bread at home just to feed the babies, but there's no money left, well, that spouse is not being blessed by God. It doesn't mean that you, who are suffering from it, are not blessed. Because if you get rid of that, maybe you can prove with other people around you that you are in the elect. But how do you prove it? In this, you prove it with asceticism. That frugal behavior, honest behavior, hardworking behavior, all of the behaviors that translate into this phrase Protestant ethic that I mentioned to you in a previous lecture. So Max Weber said that this Protestant ethic, which was born in asceticism, came from this Doctrine of Predestination, the really new and far out ideas of John Calvin way back when the Pilgrims came here. These ideas were very, very different. That's why the Pilgrims had to escape religious persecution. But Max Weber said, this religious belief and practice to try to prove who am I, this or this, resulted in capitalism as a macro-scale economic institution in this country. Because remember, when the white folks got here, there wasn't white folk norms. There wasn't white folk social institutions. The only thing that was important to them was religion and survival from day to day. And from the religion and the survival efforts that they made day to day, look what was born, right? So capitalism became that economic system, and Max Weber said it's linked directly to all of this. And he's got some receipts. You should read the book. It's Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. So, Karl Marx had some receipts too and gave some evidence to prove his point that he thought was pretty undisputable. And Max Weber offered a lot of historic evidence to support his claims that he thought were pretty indisputable. And that's what it means for you when you are a college-educated individual. You need to have a very open mind and listen to both sides of the story. And you need to listen to people who have a differing point of view than you and listen to the evidence that they are or are not using. Listen politely, listen carefully, because you need to be open-minded enough to accept the fact that sometimes you and I are going to be wrong about our preconceived notions because we haven't considered all the evidence, and sometimes others are going to be incorrect about their notions that they come in with because they haven't considered all the evidence properly. But they're not dumb, okay? And they're not unworthy of polite discussion and debate. So you know that, right? You would not treat others who differ in opinion that way, I'm sure. So this concludes our Max Weber discussion about what he said, how he said religion and capitalism were connected. And so I would love to see your reaction papers about what you think. Which one of these folks is spot on and why. Remember, you got to give me some receipts so that I take your word for it. Okay? See you soon.